Sandra had everything life could offer: money, fame, luxury, and a name that echoed across the city like a melody of success. Her father was a man whose business empire stretched across nations, and her mother's fashion brand was the pride of the elite. They lived in a mansion that glowed like gold under the evening sun, with tall gates that seemed to separate their world from everyone else's. But beyond all that glamour was a girl wrapped in pride, a young woman who wore arrogance like perfume, letting it speak before she even opened her mouth. From childhood, Sandra was treated like royalty. Servants rushed at her every command. Chefs prepared dishes she barely tasted, and drivers stood for hours waiting for her to decide which car she wanted for the day. To her, the world revolved around her mood. If she smiled, everyone breathed easier. If she frowned, the entire household trembled. Her friends adored her not out of love but out of fear and admiration for her wealth. She had learned early that money made people bend, and she enjoyed the power it gave her. Each morning, Sandra woke to the scent of imported flowers placed by her bedside. Her mirror reflected a girl who looked perfect on the outside: flawless skin, designer clothes, diamonds that glittered like stars. But behind those eyes was a deep emptiness, something she couldn't name. Yet she masked it with pride, pretending that life was exactly how she wanted it to be. In school, Sandra was a storm. Teachers dreaded her presence because her father's influence meant she was untouchable. She laughed at those who came from humble backgrounds, tossing casual insults as if kindness was beneath her. When she spoke, her words cut sharper than a knife. When others cried, she mocked their weakness. Life to Sandra was a ladder, and she believed she stood permanently at the top. Her friends were the same, the city's richest children, bonded by vanity and social status. They spent weekends at exclusive clubs, took trips to luxury resorts, and made fun of those who didn't belong. But Sandra was their queen. They followed her lead in everything. Whatever Sandra said was law. Then came that Friday evening when her friend Tracy suggested they go camping outside the city. Something adventurous, she called it. Sandra had laughed at the idea. Her nails alone cost more than the village they were going to, she joked. But deep inside, a strange curiosity whispered to her. She had lived all her life in luxury. Maybe it would be fun to see how the ordinary people lived, just for laughs. So she agreed. The next day, 3 sleek cars rolled out of the city, heading toward the green hills that kissed the clouds in the distance. Loud music filled the air, the girls danced, and Sandra felt powerful, watching the countryside blur past her tinted window. But as the road narrowed and the forest thickened, she began to feel something new, a silence she wasn't used to. The city's noise was gone, replaced by the chirping of unseen birds and the whisper of wind through tall trees. At the campsite, everything felt too natural. The air smelled of earth, not perfume. The water came from a stream, not bottled brands. The night was lit by stars instead of chandeliers. Sandra complained about everything: the bugs, the dirt, the lack of Wi-Fi. Her friends laughed, but she didn't find it funny. To her, it felt like punishment. When darkness fell, the others gathered around the fire, roasting food and telling jokes. Sandra wandered off alone, her phone in hand, searching for a network signal. She walked deeper and deeper into the forest, ignoring the faint voices calling her back. The air grew colder, the wind louder. She lifted her phone high, hoping for a single bar of service. None came. Minutes turned to hours. The fire's glow disappeared behind the trees. She turned around, but nothing looked familiar anymore. The paths twisted like a maze. Every tree looked the same, and the forest seemed alive with shadows. Panic slowly crept in. For the first time in her life, Sandra didn't know what to do. She tried calling her friends, but her phone went blank. No network, no light, just silence. She screamed their names, but the forest answered only with echoes. The night closed in around her. Her designer shoes sank into mud. Her expensive dress tore against branches, and her hair tangled with leaves. The proud city girl was now a lost stranger in the wilderness. Hours later, exhaustion won. She sat on a rock, trembling, her mascara smudged by tears she didn't even realize she was shedding. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and fear wrapped around her like a cold blanket. She thought of her parents, her home, her soft bed, and for the first time, she missed them not for comfort but for love. Back at the campsite, her friends noticed she was gone. They searched for hours before running to the car, driving back to the city in panic. News spread quickly. Sandra, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Williams, is missing. The police were alerted, helicopters flew, and her parents' mansion became a place of endless prayers and reporters' flashes. Meanwhile, Sandra wandered deeper into the unknown, her pride slowly crumbling under the weight of fear and hunger. She tried to retrace her steps, but every turn led her farther away. The forest no longer looked beautiful. It looked endless, like a punishment for every cruel word she had ever spoken. When morning broke, sunlight filtered through the trees, casting gold over her dirt-stained face. She dragged herself forward, weak but unwilling to give up. Her mind raced with regret. She thought about how she had treated people, the maids she insulted, the friends she mocked, the strangers she looked down on. For the first time, shame burned hotter than fear. But just when hope began to fade, the faint sound of voices reached her ears. Laughter, water splashing, human voices. Her heart jumped. She followed the sound, stumbling through the forest until she saw it. A group of girls by a river, fetching water with clay pots on their heads. Her relief was instant, but so was her arrogance. The sun rose high above the trees, shining through the branches and lighting up the path before Sandra. Her feet hurt from walking all night, her clothes were dirty, and her stomach rumbled from hunger. When she saw the girls by the stream, it felt like she had finally found her way back to people. But her pride was still alive. Instead of asking softly for help, she shouted like she was still in the city. The girls turned and stared, surprised by her tone. One of them, a tall, dark-skinned girl with kind eyes, dropped her pot of water and came closer. Her name was Chioma. She looked at Sandra carefully, wondering who this strange girl was and why she looked so lost. Sandra, on the other hand, crossed her arms and frowned. She wanted help, but she didn't know how to ask nicely. Chioma tried to ask her what happened, but Sandra's harsh voice made it hard to even want to listen. Chioma finally told her to follow, leading her out of the forest and into the small village. Sandra looked around in disgust. The houses were made of mud and wood, chickens ran across the road, and children played with bare feet in the dust. She couldn't believe she was really there. Everything looked strange and poor compared to the city life she knew. But Chioma didn't seem to notice Sandra's attitude. She guided her kindly to her family house, a small hut surrounded by banana trees. Chioma's mother was sitting outside, peeling cassava. When she saw Sandra, she stood up quickly, shocked by the girl's fancy clothes and tired face. Sandra looked completely out of place. Chioma explained that Sandra was lost and needed somewhere to rest. Without hesitation, the woman welcomed her. She gave Sandra a wooden chair to sit on and offered her food. Sandra stared at the plate like it was something strange. It wasn't the kind of food she was used to, but her hunger soon won. She ate quietly, embarrassed that she was enjoying the simple meal so much. As the day went on, Sandra sat silently, watching life in the village. Children carried water, women cooked on firewood. Men came back from the farm with baskets of yams. Everyone seemed happy, even without phones, cars, or fine clothes. Confused her. How could they smile with so little? That question stayed in her mind as night fell and Chioma prepared a mat for her to sleep on. It was rough and thin, but Sandra was too tired to complain. She closed her eyes and slept deeply for the first time since she got lost. The next morning, Chioma woke early to fetch water. Sandra woke up and looked around, confused by the sound of roosters. She had never woken up to such noise before. When Chioma came back, she smiled and greeted her kindly. Sandra just nodded. She didn't know how to respond. But inside her, something small was starting to change. She was beginning to realize how much she depended on people she used to look down on. Back in the city, the search for her had grown serious. Her parents had offered a big reward, and posters with her face were everywhere. Reporters followed the story daily, calling it the missing heiress. But no one had any idea that the rich girl they were all searching for was living quietly in a small village with no phone network, wearing borrowed clothes and fetching water from a stream. In the village, Sandra was beginning to adjust. She learned to greet people in the morning. She helped Chioma's mother cook, and she even tried carrying a small bucket of water from the stream. At first, everyone laughed, but Chioma encouraged her. Sandra found herself laughing too. A real laugh, not the fake one she used at city parties. The people in the village were poor, but they had something she had never seen before: peace. One afternoon, as Sandra sat outside, she overheard two women talking about her. They were wondering who she really was and why she hadn't gone back home yet. For the first time, Sandra felt shame. She realized that her attitude on the first day had made her look proud and rude. She wanted to change that. The next day, she joined Chioma at the stream to fetch water again. This time, when she dropped her bucket and water splashed on her feet, she laughed at herself instead of getting angry. The village girls smiled. They were beginning to like her. Days turned into a week. Sandra started helping with chores, and everyone noticed how humble she had become. She was surprised at how good it felt to be kind, how easy it was to smile when no one was trying to impress anyone. Chioma became her closest friend. They talked about life, about dreams, about how different the world could be for two girls from such opposite backgrounds. But deep inside, Sandra knew she couldn't stay there forever. Sometimes, she would sit outside at night, looking at the stars, thinking about her parents. She wondered if they had given up on finding her. She missed them, but she also feared going back. She didn't want to return as the same proud girl she once was. The village had changed her in ways she couldn't explain. One afternoon, as Sandra helped Chioma's mother prepare food, a group of villagers came running. They had seen strangers near the forest. Men in uniforms holding pictures. Sandra's heart skipped. Could it be the police? Chioma ran to check while Sandra waited, her heart pounding fast. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to be found. When Chioma returned, she said the men were still searching near the hills. Sandra looked down, tears filling her eyes. She had prayed to be rescued before, but now the thought of leaving her new family hurt deeply. She had found something money could never buy: kindness, friendship, and peace. That night she couldn't sleep. She thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the hunger, the lessons. She realized how blind she had been all her life. She had looked down on people who had more heart than she ever did. She wished she could tell her parents about Chioma, about the village, about how happy she had become without all the noise and pride. The morning began quietly in the village. The air was soft. The sky roosters echoed through the hills. Sandra woke up early, feeling strange inside. Something in her heart told her that this day would not be like the others. She stepped outside and watched Chioma fetch water from the stream as usual, her laughter floating through the air. Everything seemed peaceful, yet Sandra felt uneasy. Later that morning, as the villagers gathered in the square for market day, the sound of an approaching vehicle broke the calm. A black jeep stopped at the edge of the road. Men stepped out, uniformed officers holding pictures in their hands. Sandra's heart froze. Chioma looked at her quietly. It was her picture they held. The search had finally reached the village. The villagers crowded around, whispering. One of the officers asked if anyone had seen the girl in the photo. For a moment, Sandra didn't move. A part of her wanted to hide. But Chioma gently touched her hand. Her eyes filled with tears she couldn't explain. Sandra slowly stepped forward. The officer looked at her closely, shock flashing across his face. Within minutes, the news spread. The missing heiress had been found alive. The entire village gathered around her. Chioma's mother hugged her tightly, whispering blessings. Chioma stood quietly, forcing a smile, though her eyes were heavy. Sandra tried to smile back, but her chest ached. She had prayed for rescue. Yet now that it was here, she felt like she was losing something more precious than all her riches. The officers escorted her to the jeep. Sandra turned one last time to look at the village. The small houses, the dusty roads, the children waving. Her eyes searched for Chioma, who stood near the stream, holding her water pot. Their eyes met, and in that silent moment, 1,000 words passed between them. Gratitude, love, goodbye. The journey back to the city felt like a dream. Sandra stared out the window, watching the green fields fade into concrete buildings. Her heart was heavy. Every mile closer to the city made her realize how far she had come, not in distance, but in change. She remembered her first night in the forest, the hunger, the fear, and the kindness that followed. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer for the people who had saved her spirit. When the car finally stopped in front of her family's mansion, cameras were everywhere. Reporters shouted her name. Her parents ran out crying. Her mother fell to her knees, thanking God. Her father hugged her tightly, tears running down his face. Sandra hugged them back, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. Her heart was too full. That night, the mansion was filled with celebration. Guests came with gifts, the press wanted interviews, and old friends arrived pretending to care. But as Sandra looked around, she saw the same faces she used to laugh with, the same people who thought money made them special. Everything looked exactly as she left it, but she no longer belonged to it. Her friends surrounded her, asking what happened, expecting wild stories. She just smiled quietly and said she had met angels. They laughed, thinking she was joking. None of them understood. She excused herself and went to her room. It felt strange. The bed was soft, the lights were bright, and yet she missed the hard mat and quiet nights of the village. She missed Chioma. Days passed, and Sandra became the talk of the city. People said she had been lucky. Some said she had lost her mind in the forest. She didn't care. She started helping the maids instead of shouting at them. She spoke kindly to her driver. She even went to her parents and thanked them for everything they had done for her. Everyone noticed the change. Her father told his friends proudly that Sandra had finally grown up. But not everyone was happy about it. One afternoon, while sitting in the garden, Sandra overheard her old friends gossiping. They said her village story was fake, that she only did it for attention. They laughed at the idea that she could have survived in a place without phones or fancy food. The words stung deeply. She realized that the people she once admired had become strangers to her heart. That evening, she went to her room and sat by the window. She picked up her phone and searched for any way to contact Chioma. But there was none. The village was far, and she didn't even know how to find it on a map. She promised herself that she would see Chioma again. Somehow. A week later, her father announced that the company had planned a charity project to build schools in rural areas. Sandra's heart leapt.